questions of Mr. Radowski. Director Pasquette.
Is the JPA proposed to be developed for the construction period only?
It's my understanding that it would cover the design of the facilities, the construction, and then the initial commissioning of the facilities. This is akin to the method that was used for the Central Coast Aqueduct portion of the State Water Project. They had an experience very similar to this in the mid-1990s.
Had you considered extending the JPA for the operations? My concern is that with some of the recent lack of resources at the state level, that the operational aspect is perhaps just as important as the construction. And so I'm wondering why the proposal is to limit the JPA's role to just the construction period.
Perhaps I'll speak to that, Director Pasquette. We had looked at operations as a separate issue and where that would appropriately lie. But since the entire State Water Project is being operated and currently owned by the Department of Water Resources, we felt this facility should be run in that manner along with the rest of the State Water Project. But we certainly have time. It's, as Mr. Bednarski pointed out, this is almost a 15-year period here. And I think that issue could be revisited at some point over the next 15 years with the legislature and the next administration as to what is the appropriate operations of the entire State Water Project, because there certainly are, as you pointed out, resource constraints within the state.
And just following up another question on the governance, you put the org chart up, which was helpful, and in the white paper there's a sentence that says that the JPA is developed through a contractual relationship between parties, including MET and the Department of Water Resources. But there's a sentence in here, and I don't have it at my fingertips, it says that the Department of Water Resources may or may not have ultimate veto. I want to understand better how it works. Will the decision making be at the JPA level? Or will there be a process and a board, but the Department of Water Resources can override the decision-making?
Take a shot at that, John. That's a good question. DWR has to remain in control of the project by statute. They are, so what we would do is form the Joint Powers Authority, and then in the contract between DWR and that Joint Powers Authority, we will need to spell out the various review and approvals that DWR may retain. So that'll be a negotiation, but they have to maintain certain decision-making themselves. But under this, just like when they contract with any other consultant to do work, the work and a lot of the decisions are made at that level. So we want to find that right balance between efficiency and moving the project along with the board of the JPA making all of those decisions that they've been delegated, but yet DWR will reserve certain decisions they make, and we'll describe those and sort of the tolerances around those.
So if we have the JPA is a little different than what I'm used to, because I'm used to ones that are statutorily created. So it sounds like this is a bit of a hybrid. If the executives are negotiating a contractual arrangement to create a JPA in the manner that you just described, what is being considered as far as the Metropolitan Water District's representation on the board of directors?
So there will be a board of directors made up of both state and federal water contractors. Primarily, these will be executive staff positions at each of those, and then we are still figuring out how the chairmanship of the JPA will rotate amongst the parties. So that would be how that would be staffed and operated. And you're right. Many of the transportation projects you're probably familiar with. Gold line construction, high-speed rail. Typically, they have a form of a JPA, a construction authority, very similar to this, created by statute. but this is one that would be created by contract. Same concept, same look and feel, and would, at the end of the day, basically have the same authorities, would just be created by contract with the state instead of by statute from the legislature.
Director Kurtz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why the 75% confidence level? And is it possible from the chart to determine if one wanted to look at the range of, say, cost from a 50% to 100% confidence level with the mitigation? How you can you get that from the chart? Could you get those numbers from the chart?
I believe from the S-curves, you could just, extrapolate the lines and get, the difference in cost between the 50% confidence level and the 100%. But the reason that the 75% was selected is industry practice appears to be selecting a confidence interval somewhere between 50 and 60%. There was recent practice that had I believe it was the SR 99 Bertha tunnel up in Seattle utilized the 60% confidence level. We felt that for this project, because of the complexity of the project and the degree of magnitude of the program that we're implementing, we wanted to go with a little bit higher level of confidence of the not to exceed estimate for the program, taking risk into account. So we bumped that up from the industry level of 50 to 60% up to 75%, and then compared that with our overall program budget. So it was somewhat arbitrary, but we felt it was a conservative way to estimate what the true project cost could be if you take risk into account.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Boyce?
Thank you, Chair Peterson. The focus group itself, was that made up of contractors or owners or some mix of that?
We used a mix of owners and consultants. I believe we had some contractor input during the development of the conceptual engineering report. We surveyed over almost a dozen tunneling contractors, but as far as that 3-day effort, it was primarily state water contractor staff that had some knowledge or expertise in large program implementation, some key DWR staff that had been involved in the program for a while, and then also we brought in some selected consultants to assist us in areas that we might have had maybe a knowledge deficit, like for these large pump stations or perhaps in the tunneling area and the intake. So we tried to have a well-rounded group that understood both design and construction of these types of facilities when we went through that process.
Thank you.
Director Lewinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On my questions, and John, thanks for the presentation. It's very well done. You talk about mitigation on this slide. What you're really talking about is mitigation of constructability, if you will. You're not. You're mitigating the risks of construction, correct?
That's correct.
We're not mitigating, and one of the issues that I've got, and I know we have 2 more white papers, and the next white papers on operations. One of the biggest risks that I see, if I understand it right, we still need permits in order to construct and operate the tunnels if they're constructed. And the, if you will, the regulations around those approvals are not yet known. And that's a huge operational risk that we don't know the answer to yet. So my question is, will the next white paper discuss that risk and that the range of risk, because that risk can go all the way to 0 benefit from the tunnels, would be worst case scenario, that the Fish and Wildlife agencies come out with such horrendous requirements that we get no additional benefit from the construction of the tunnels to something where we do get a benefit. Are we going to be discussing those risks as part of our operational white paper?
Yes, the next white paper will, as I said, it's going to be a pretty meaty paper. It will do an analysis of what we believe the operational constraints and restrictions are. We'll try to provide some assessment of the risk associated with those. We will describe how Metropolitan will be involved in the adaptive management program and the science programs, which help to mitigate. And we need to remember that the fish agency permits for the tunnels were recently issued by the Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service. That is a huge step, but we know 15 years from now, if the project goes forward, as the science evolves, so to speak, or our understanding of the science, that changes will likely be made in those permits. We've experienced that in the past. And so we will do the best job we can of trying to be fair about an assessment of that, and it will be included in the next white paper.
And on that financial white paper, is there any intent by staff to have a discussion about how we're going to allocate those fixed costs among our MWD member agencies, or is the assumption that we're simply going to place it on our water rate?
The latter.
The latter. So that, now I'm just going to make a comment, Mr. Chairman. This project has been presented as, if you will, an insurance policy for the future supply of the region. And if we only place the cost of this project on those agencies that are buying water, we're essentially saying, we're going to purchase an insurance policy, but you don't have to pay for that insurance policy until you need it. And I'll pick on my friend John Morris here. His agency essentially doesn't buy hardly any water from Metropolitan, yet has the insurance, the ability to call on that water whenever he needs it. And so that agency isn't going to be paying for the insurance policy on a day in and day out basis unless he purchases water. And I have a problem with that. I know I'm in the minority, but I just wanted to get that point across. Now, I'm not picking on Director Morris or his agency, but he doesn't purchase a lot of water, so that's why I mentioned it. Thank you.
Yeah, he also doesn't create any burden for the district for water. Director Steiner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the DCA and the JPA also going to be responsible for financing? I mean, I noticed that there was a financial group, but it didn't seem to be focused on the actual financing and going out for bonds or anything along those lines. Is that going to be one of their job duties?
I'll take a first cut at that, and Jeff can add. The discussion with DWR and amongst the contractors has been to set up a parallel JPA to do the financing.
Okay.
So that's how we're looking at that, similar to what we've done in other programs. But the recommendation that we're getting from council and others is create a separate JPA, sits alongside the construction, and they do the financing aspects of it.
And I
So that's what
sort of wondered if I was reading that between the lines, because you do have the DWR having approval, and one of the things is that cost going over 5%. So I presume that whatever the separate JPA would have similar issues or restrictions put on it, such as appear here as to other things. And then I think there was a mention that you were going to talk about $2017, and I don't remember hearing that. I'm sorry if I missed it.
Oh, yeah, I think I addressed it with this slide here, where we, these are in 2014 dollars, the 15.74. And then if you use the engineering news record construction cost index for the last 3 years, it's averaged about 3.1, 3.2%. So just for purposes of talking roughly, adding about 10% to this number brings you up to about $17 billion for the escalated construction costs in 2017 dollars.
And the last question has to deal with the permits. I know that we need permits for the intakes as well as the operation, and I know the fish permits were a very big step, as you mentioned, but I didn't recall that those actually address those particular permits.
I'm sorry.
So do we still need to have permits for the creation of the intakes, and we need to have permits for, on
State
top
board.
of the fish permits, right?
Okay, so there are numerous
a ton
additional
of
permits that we
right.
will need. As I think we remember, the key permits we wanted to see before we could make a decision here were the federal and state fishery agency permits. Yes, Corps of Engineers will have multiple permits that they will need to issue. The State Water Board is in the proceeding to add the new points of diversion, so that'll be another form of a permit. And then the State Water Board is also, not specific to this project, but they're in the middle of updating the water quality control plan for the Delta, which we will need to keep a very close eye on. I mean, and we are keeping a very close eye on and participating in that. So there are numerous permits that will still be needed, but I think the big ones are the ones that we just received.
And the State Water Board was my last question, because I think they're also looking at diversion issues, correct? Thank you.
Director Dake?
The question I have is, will the tunnels be a part of the Delta water charge? And you could respond when the time comes, when the financing white paper comes out. And second, for the Central Valley contractors, how will those contractors receive their obligations for this? Thank you.
I think that's the subject for the last meeting, the last paper.
No, but thank you for the input, and we'll make sure those points are addressed in that third white paper.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dake. Do you still want to say something? I kind of defended you.
I understand that. I just, for a point of clarification, the City of San Marino participated with the Colorado River Aqueduct Association in the 1920s and was one of the founding member agencies of the Metropolitan. And they joined specifically as part of a collective as an insurance policy for the city. And the premium we pay is we pay twice as much for what we get over time as the second most expensive buyer of water of Metropolitan, which is the city of Beverly Hills. That's about 8 times per acre foot what San Diego pays.
You really didn't need to do that. Director Wunderlich? Director Wunderlich?
Thank you. 2 points. I do tend to agree that if we go forward on this, that the way our ratepayers will pay for it, it would be by wrapping this into our rates the way that we usually do. But separately, I do think in the future we should have a discussion about fixed and variable components of our rates, and I've long been an advocate of increasing the fixed component of our rates because there is an insurance role, and I think that should be reflected.
Director De Jesus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions. Given the time that staff has put into risk management and confidence level calculations, and having heard stories about DWR-led projects and their cost overruns, has that been considered at all in the fact that if DWR runs this project, more than likely there will be some additional fees and charges throughout a 15-year period that certainly is going to add to the cost of burden?
Well, if I might, Director Days, that's the whole point of this design construction authority that will handle with a board made up of contractors and staffed by Metropolitan staff and other contractor staff to mitigate that risk. And that is our best way, we think, to best manage and mitigate the risk that you're touching on.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think that's going to stop DWR from invoicing, if you will, or vetoing if, in fact, they do have some higher authority on that. But I'll accept that as an answer.
Director Abdu?
But I don't quite understand what the rush is for a decision in September.
Director
My only
Ballin?
comment,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, my comment is we are not, as staff, in a rush. We have taken a decade on this, and we are taking 3 months of analysis on this. If you feel it takes 6 months, then we can certainly put that to a vote and do that. But we are taking, the next July, August, and September to look at this over 90 days, and we have been covering this at this special committee on a monthly or bi-monthly basis for the last 7 years. So we think we're taking a pretty measured approach to this, and I don't believe this is a rush, but if you feel rushed, that's up to the chair of the committee, certainly.
Okay, Director Pascat?
Jeff, in addition to the vote in September on the funding, will the vote for the board also include the delegation of authority for the JPA?
Yeah, our idea is that when we bring it to the board for an action, it would be an encompassing action that would authorize the Metropolitan's participation in the JPA, the financing, and commitment to the project, and other ancillary measures that would be needed to move forward. You know, I've heard comments about perhaps, you know, more commentary on some of the other economic analyses out there and some of the other dissenting views. One of the things I think we're looking for in this process is to get more input on that, and if we need to have a fourth paper that covers frequently asked questions, other concerns, things like that, we'll certainly prepare that and distribute that as well.
Because
as
the
we
way
go on.
you were, I don't know if you wrote it or Roger wrote it.
I certainly didn't write very much of this. That I can guarantee.
It says that we're not going to see the environmental mitigation until after, so it says upon project approval, so that I read that as September, and I would hate to wait until after the project approved before we can see the planned environmental mitigation.
No, we will have that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's fair. We will capture that. We have that information. It's been made available. So between when the EIR is certified, and we will also fold in the biological opinions that we receive, so we can fold all of that mitigation together in more detail.
Will that be next month?
Yeah, we'll do that.
No, okay, thank you.
Last call. Okay, thank you. All right, so now we will just adjourn this meeting and turn the meeting over to the chairman, Water Stewardship.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the robust discussion.